Hello, my name is Layton. I'm an intuitive and a mystic, and today we are going to spend some time delving into occult anatomy. I really wanted to organize this in a way where we are going through it, we are moving through it with the spheres, because I find it really fascinating how each sphere correlates with a certain anatomical structure, and how it acts as an etheric counterpart to that structure that is very nourishing and life-giving to the body when we are able to connect with it intentionally. So I think this is really cool and important, because when we have this understanding of how various spheres impact the body, I believe it helps us to enter into this relationship with it, where through that understanding, we can find more balance and we can bring ourselves into a state where we are more functional and we are healthier, because I really don't believe that we can achieve optimal health without this understanding. So today, we are going to talk about the sun, solar organs, and processes. I really wanted to start with the sun because I love talking about it, first of all, but also it allows us to get into the etherization of the blood, which is one of my favorite topics ever, because I don't know about you, but I'm really excited by things that I know to be true. Things that I know work, things that are practical and measurable in my life. And so if I hear about some sort of occult process, the first thing that I want to know is, what is this going to look like when I practically apply it? How can I actually bring this process into my life and apply it in a way where it leads me to being a more functional and healthier human being, and where I can truly measure the progress and see the changes as they occur within my system. I want to know that something works. There's no point in wasting our time with anything that isn't a science. So the thing that I love about the anthroposophical system is that we are working with an occult science. It is practical, it is applicable, it is measurable. I always say that. I'm like a broken record, because it's true. And that's something that has always been very exciting to me. And the etherization of the blood is something that, without that teaching and without that understanding, I really wasn't able to move forward in certain areas in my life, because I was misunderstanding certain processes. And so when we have a misunderstanding of how something works, it causes us to interact with that process in a different way, and often in a way that is incorrect. So this is where we see a lot of issues within either dogmatic Christianity or within the New Age, where we are seeing certain processes being inverted or profaned or twisted in some way, having things added to it, having things taken away. And it's really being processed from this place of emotional reactivity or emotional reasoning, where we are kind of deciding, because I feel this way, this actually means this, instead of approaching it as a science. And if you could imagine being a chemist or a mathematician, what happens when one step is wrong? I mean, the whole thing falls apart. If you're a chemist and you mix the wrong chemical into some solution, you could have an explosion or a chemical burn. It can cause real issues. If you're a mathematician and you put down the wrong quality, or you give a letter the wrong quality, or you have the wrong variable, then the entire problem completely unravels and you have to start all over again. So what ends up happening is we have people who are very well-meaning, who want to learn and want to grow, and they end up feeling stunted because they get to a certain point where they don't quite have the foundation necessary in order to actually interact with these processes in a way that is going to be nourishing and life-giving. So starting with the heart. The heart is not a pump, not in the traditional sense that we have begun to understand it as, but it's actually a dynamic center radiating formative forces that are akin to the sun's life-giving energy. It's kind of like the nucleus of the body in a spiritual sense. Just as the sun emanates light and warmth to sustain life on earth, the heart distributes etheric and spiritual vitality and nourishment, harmonizing the physical and etheric bodies. The heart pulses in a rhythmic motion that reflects greater cosmic rhythms and highlights the symbiotic relationship between the human body and spiritual evolution. So the heart is kind of the center of everything. The heart is the sun of the body. So if we look at the body as a physical manifestation of the cosmos, we have our own inner galaxy. And the heart is the hub of everything. It's the center of everything. It's what nourishes us. It's what gives us light. What gives us life. It's the sun. The etherization of the blood is the spiritualization of the human form. So if you were to look at the human form as a dense and material object, what happens is that through trauma and through pain, through challenging or difficult experiences, we build up grief and anger and fear and insecurity and all of these things within the body. These things technically fall within the lower centers. So as they are built up within the body, they are built up within what I call the survival centers. So if in Eastern mysticism, we would see this as the chakra centers. The lower centers would then be the lower three chakras. And so from the solar plexus down to the root chakra, you have these survival instincts that manifest, and those are correlated with the lower nervous system. So our things that have to do with our feelings of safety, our feelings of security, our ability to be rooted and grounded within the body, our identity, our individuality, our emotional understanding, and our emotional responses, our self-concept, all of that is going to fall within the lower three centers. Now, what ends up happening is that through our life experiences, the lower three centers begin to become extremely defined, but not necessarily in a good way. We're kind of just accumulating all of these things. And if we are not actively and intentionally living and being embodied within the heart, then we're kind of staying locked in those lower centers, meaning that in that place where we're really in the lower nervous system, we are more prone to connecting with the lower astral. We're more prone to having our identity be expressing itself from a place of trauma, having our identity be the manifestation of our pain. And because there's no balance, we don't have the heart in the picture. We don't have the upper chakra system or the upper centers in the picture, meaning that the upper centers, this is where we access higher spiritual functions and where we commune with higher spiritual forces. And so in order to do that, the heart is the hub or the center of that. When we cannot bring the lower centers into the heart because the heart has become too dense from our pain and our trauma, or we have dissociated or disconnected from it, then we end up truly locked and stuck down there, and we can't really make any progress. Where etherization of the blood comes in is that the etherization of the blood is the spiritualization of the human form. So this function is extremely necessary in order to move us from those lower centers, which are dense and calcifying, into the higher centers, which can connect to etheric forces and pull them down into the body and distribute them throughout the body, nourishing the denser aspects. The way that this works is that the spiritualization of the human form happens with the activation of the heart. And as the heart is activated and the Christ impulse is activated within the heart, it then begins to, and this is an etheric process. This is not going to be measured on an X-ray. When I'm talking about the different anatomical functions and how they correlate with etheric processes, try and visualize this from an etheric standpoint right now. Because what ends up happening is that all of the blood in our body, the blood carries our I. It carries our individuality, meaning that it carries our perception of ourself and whether or not we are a whole being or we are a fragmented being. So it really carries our identity. And so the blood, when it's not passing through the heart in a higher form, in a higher way, it ends up instead becoming imbued with everything that's in those lower centers. So if we are making our identity something that is from a place of trauma and it's from a place of pain, then our blood is imbuing that. It's imbued with that, and it's moving it all within our body. And we are really marinating in this victim mentality. We're marinating in this concept of, I am a victim, I am in pain, I'm traumatized, and this is my identity. So as that traumatized blood, those etheric forces begin to move throughout the body in a lower way. And this is actually what happens there is that is the astral body, which is the pain body, overwhelming the blood and overwhelming the circulatory system. And so when we're doing that, we are essentially solidifying and calcifying that identity within our nervous system. I hope you're following me, and I hope this makes sense. So when we activate the heart, we are activating these higher etheric forces that then come through, and all of that traumatized, calcified blood that has made up our fragmented identity for so long, it begins to pass through the heart. And all of that pain and trauma, the heart acts as this furnace that starts to burn that away. And as it burns that away, it doesn't burn that away in the sense of destroying it or getting rid of it. I don't know if you guys just heard my cats making weird noises in the background. They say hi. So instead of getting rid of it or shoving it to the side, what it's doing in that fire is alchemy. It is an alchemical fire, and it is taking lower substances and transforming them and refining them into higher substances. So what begins as this astral substance that is correlated with survival responses, an identity that is around, it revolves around pain and trauma and this fear and this hatred and anger and pain and trauma, all of this stuff, it begins to be pulled from its lowest expression into its highest expression through the integration of the sun into that darkness. So the lower three centers are kind of like the black sun of the system. And then the upper three centers are like the white sun of the system. Neither is good or bad in and of itself. These are neutral forces, but they have to be balanced within one another. So if we stay dropped in that black sun energy for too long, what happens is that we end up cannibalizing the self. because everything is just burning away instead of becoming transmuted and being pulled into a higher etheric substance. So blood acts as a carrier of etheric life forces. Etherization of the blood, or the spiritualization of the human form, transforms lower energies into higher spiritual substance. This is very important for us to understand, because this is how we activate the Christ impulse within the body. And without this important step, if we don't understand the etheric process of exactly what is happening here, then we won't be able to awaken to the conscious awareness of the process, which can stunt the process. So as the blood moves through the heart, it then moves up into the thymus, and from there moves up into the pineal gland. When you take this higher substance, this higher etheric substance that is now being carried by the blood, and you pull it up into the pineal gland. Again, these are etheric processes. What happens is that what we in Eastern mysticism would call the third eye becomes open, and it becomes open to communion with the spiritual hierarchies. Now, in circumstances where someone has done some sort of plant medicine ritual, or they have had a very traumatic psychic experience, what may happen is that the third eye is open before etherization has really been able to set in. So what I was describing in the beginning of this, where I was talking about when we have these, all of this pain and trauma, and everything is dense and it's calcified, and that is being carried through the entire human form, and it is bringing death to the spiritual organs and the physical organs. It is cutting us off from nourishment. It is cutting us off from higher spiritual forces. I call this reverse etherization, because I feel like that is the easiest imagery to kind of have. It's, instead of having this forward moving higher spiritual process happening within the system, that process is now inverted. It is reversed. And instead of being active in the heart and transforming all of those lower impulses and having that trauma and pain become spiritualized and carrying that nourishment and those life-giving forces throughout the system, which is very healing and life-giving, we are doing the complete opposite. And we're just carrying all of that pain and trauma throughout the system, which is cutting our organs off from etheric nourishing forces and causing them to calcify, causing them to densify. This is not just something that I want you to visualize as an etheric process in the sense that it doesn't impact physical organs, because it does. When we cut our physical organs off from their etheric counterpart, they are unable to be nourished or supported by higher spiritual functions. And when that happens, we have sickness and disease and cancers. It can cause mental illness. It can cause dissociation and disembodiment. So in order to truly have alignment within the physical body and the astral body and the etheric bodies, what we need to do is understand these connections so that we can work with this process as a complex whole, instead of simplifying it into one thing and thinking that if we just detox the physical body, that we can cure ourselves of these sicknesses and disease that actually have an astral foundation. It has an astral beginning. There is some disconnect with the etheric body where it is unable to transform certain aspects within the astral body. It is unable to nourish the physical body. And if we don't have that foundation, then we're going to be kind of running around in circles attempting to heal something without getting to the root of the real problem. We would just be putting a Band-Aid on it. So the sun also relates back to the solar plexus. The solar plexus, if you are looking at an Eastern chakra chart, is yellow. And this is because the solar plexus is a site of etheric processing that is linked to the sun, and it also influences digestion and the vital energy that supports the heart. So as I was saying earlier about how the sun and the etherization of the blood, it all relates back to our individuality, to our identity. Our solar plexus is kind of the etheric hub of where our identity and our health and our groundedness all kind of comes together. And so it's not that the sun is just because realistically, we could relate the sun back to multiple different processes. Above all else, it is related anatomically and occult-wise to the heart. However, it also moves through and has a relationship with various other processes. For example, it passes through the blood. And Venus also has a connection with the blood. We're going to get into that when we go into Venus. But there's a lot of overlap here. And I just want to clarify that because I know that these topics can get kind of confusing at times. But that being said, the sun, it moves through multiple different anatomical structures. It impacts us etherically in different ways. And that is because it is a dynamic and complex force. It's something that becomes imbued in the system. It becomes very life-giving and it impacts everything else. So we can see if we are having poor digestion, or this could even be something, you could have GI tract issues, you may have leaky gut, you may have a really fast metabolism or a really slow metabolism. Anything like that can be an indicator that for whatever reason, there is some sort of imbalance of the sun within the system. And so when we are meditating or when we are trying to kind of clairvoyantly go into that and see what's going on, we are communing with the sun and attempting to measure how can I bring this force into my system in a way that is going to bring about balance. In what way does this need to be balanced? So often, because of the fact that the solar plexus, it falls into the lower three chakras, when there is any kind of issues with the gut, it is because there have been overactive black sun forces within the body. I have gone through this personally. I had a very overactive black sun. And if you don't know, because I don't want to get too much into the black sun with this because I already don't know how long this video is going to be. But if you don't understand what I'm talking about there, I'll link some stuff and some information in the description to kind of give a little bit more background on that. But when we are doing any form of medical intuition or anything like that, we have to have the understanding of how various spheres impact different anatomical structures, different biological processes, how it's going to impact the cells, the blood, and various organs. It's important for us to understand that. And different occultists will say different things. What I am covering here is what is most widely known with Western occultism, and also what I personally resonate with, what I have seen as someone who operates in medical intuition. The pineal gland is also connected to the sun, which should not surprise you because we just talked about that when we were talking about etherization of the blood. So the pineal gland, it's connected to our inner light. And this is, again, because through the etherization of the blood, it is activating the third eye and opening us up to higher spiritual forces. And these forces, they have a very palpable impact on our neuroplasticity, on our ability to retrain the brain as far as limbic function goes, our ability to recover from certain traumas and the impact that trauma has had on the brain. And the thoughts that we have are a measurable indicator of whether or not we are connected to higher forces or lower forces in any given moment. I really don't want to sound too new agey with this, so I don't want this to come off as you are either high vibrational or low vibrational, because of course we are dynamic, complex beings. We are always going to have this balance where we're kind of balancing the scales. And so we may have 80% higher thoughts and then something else that is lower comes in. And that doesn't mean that you're just trapped in the lower centers necessarily. What you want to look at is how frequently something happens and how consistently it happens. So if you are constantly in this place of feeling very traumatized, having a lot of thoughts of being a victim, having a lot of insecurity, a lot of jealousy, a lot of envy, you may be in a black sun period where in order to bring balance to your body, you really need to connect intentionally with these higher forces so that these lower centers don't completely overtake you. We have to be very intentional about this work. We have to understand exactly what's happening so that we know how to mitigate it, so that we know how to work with it. So in occult anatomy, the pineal gland is seen as a mediator of etheric and spiritual light, which goes into exactly what I was just saying about how when the pineal gland opens, and it opens through the proper etherization of the blood, it opens to these higher spiritual forces, these angelic forces. Once activated through the process of the etherization of the blood, we become open to the seat of the soul, which opens us up to higher intuitive faculties. We cannot have true psychic clarity if we do not experience a psychic awakening through this process. And that's because if the third eye or the pineal gland is forced open because of a plant medicine ritual or a traumatic psychic experience, or us just kind of unknowingly going into it and trying to force ourselves into these out-of-body experiences and having these very disembodying experiences, when we do that, we are opening ourselves up not necessarily just to higher spiritual forces, but to a broad spectrum of entities. That's a creepy thing to think about. You know, you don't necessarily want to do that. We need to be grounded within the physical body first. And in order to be grounded within the physical body, we have to activate the higher nervous system. The higher nervous system is directly correlated with the sun because the higher nervous system represents the nervous system that has become imbued with the sun. And it becomes so imbued with the sun that the quality of the nervous system and the way that we feel in our bodies completely changes. So one example I'll give of this is that when we are in the lower nervous system, and I mean really chronically in that fight or flight and just feeling completely dissociated and disconnected and anxious and panicky all the time, there is a vibration that is felt within the body and nervous system. It's often called tremors, that feels like static. Static correlates with electricity, but not organic electricity. We correlate static with subnatural electricity. So when you think of static, you think of TV static. Who wants to feel like that? You know, that's something right out of the eighth sphere. That's something right out of the lower astral. That is not something that we are supposed to feel or experience within our body. But it happens because the nervous system becomes so traumatized and fragmented, and we are just running on astral fumes. We have nothing that is nourishing, nothing that is life-giving, being able to connect within our nervous system. And this isn't, I don't want you to, if you're experiencing something like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong in order to make this happen. Oftentimes we have a lot of karma and we have certain traumatic experiences that trigger these states within the nervous system. I talk about this a lot on my channel, but especially in my series on healing the clairvoyant, because I went through the exact same thing. So I know what it feels like to have those tremors within your nervous system and to feel completely cut off from these life-giving forces. It's not a death sentence. You don't have to stay that way. It's not a forever experience. If we are able to, through these understandings and through consistent and conscious effort, build up the higher nervous system, stop dissociating, and learn to become grounded and embodied as individuals, to choose to become grounded and embodied, because it is a choice. It's something that we have to actively work through every single day, because there is so much crap around us and in the world that wants to encourage us to dissociate and to escape. It wants us to want to leave our bodies. And that is not going to help us at all. So the spinal column is a solar conduit. The spinal column is where all of the nerves in our body stem and intertwine. So it's very connected to our nervous system. It's a channel for solar etheric forces, which are distributed through the nervous system. So again, when we are talking about occult anatomy, it can be confusing, because it's like, well, Leighton, you just said that the sun was correlated with the heart, and now you're saying the spinal column. Well, the spinal column is a channel or conduit for those forces, whereas the heart is the expression of it, if that makes sense. Edgar Cayce has even said that improper spinal alignment is one of the biggest causes of imbalance and disease. I remember reading that and being like, oh, yeah, I need to really get my posture under control and make sure that everything is aligned. And you can even feel it when you sit up straight and align your posture as much as possible. There is this shift that happens. If you are tuned into etheric forces within your body and what that feels like, you will feel a change. So proper alignment of the spine is necessary in order for etheric, again, nourishing, life-giving forces, that is the etheric body, in order for etheric substances to reach certain organs and nourish the body. This is why I'm a really big believer in craniosacral therapy. I think it's incredibly helpful. When I went for my first craniosacral therapy session, it was the most bizarre thing ever, because she's just moving, she's adjusting me and moving me in different ways that are, it's causing my spinal fluid to reach different places in my body that it doesn't usually reach. It actually feels like if someone turned on slightly cool water and it just started traveling through your system. Or I guess a better example of this is if you've ever gotten an IV and that feeling of the cold liquid kind of moving through your body. It was bizarre. It was really weird, but it made me feel good. And I remember her saying at the time, you are really misaligned here. And I just felt so much better after that. So sometimes we have different, anatomically and genetically, we may have different issues. For example, I have Marfan syndrome. So if you don't know what that is, I have different issues with my spine. I have really long limbs. I can maneuver my body in weird ways. I have an inverted chest plate. I have my left atrium on my heart is actually enlarged because it is a birth defect. So I'm a walking birth defect. And but I've learned ways like this to kind of mitigate things and bring in that healing. And so for me, craniosacral therapy has been very, very helpful for that. And I would recommend it for absolutely anyone. And I think in general, if we just do things like intentionally practicing strengthening the spine and sitting up straight, and even when meditating, I would not, and I don't want to be a hypocrite here, I do this sometimes, okay? Sometimes I meditate when I'm laying down because it kind of naturally happens. But when we are intentionally going into a meditative state, I don't recommend doing that. I recommend sitting upright on the floor or a chair or a couch or a cushion, wherever you are, and having the crisscrossed leg position where it's kind of making that triangle and your spine is up straight, because I think that it allows for better movement and more flow within the bodies. And I think well, maybe I didn't say this, I don't remember, about how when we look at the chakras in the Eastern mysticism, we can attribute those to etheric centers within Western mysticism. So sometimes I may refer to them as chakras just because that's more widely known and widely understood. But when I am referring to etheric centers, I am also referring to chakras because it's pretty much the same thing. And so these are kind of like specific receptor points within the body that correlate with different spheres, and they correlate with different organs. They correlate with different emotions and different psychological processes as well. And we'll get into that more. So as I was saying before with the sun, that is going to correlate with the solar plexus. Psychologically, the sun is going to correlate with our identity, with our perception of ourselves and the world, and with our emotions, because we have, and really, I mean, everything correlates with our emotions in some ways, but specifically with our ability to transform lower emotions into higher emotions, because that is our movement through the black sun into the white sun. So that is all I wanted to say on that for now. If this is received well, I can go a lot deeper into it. I don't want to overwhelm everyone because I know it's a lot of information. So I'm kind of just trying to give an introduction to each thing and cover as much as I can without necessarily being too academic about it. So if there was any specific part that interests you, I would love to hear what that is. Maybe that's something that I could put together in a workbook or something like that, so that I could have diagrams and imagery and definitions next to everything. I always find that, at least for me, I really enjoy things like that. I find that it helps me to integrate the information a little bit better, but I don't want each of these videos to get too long. So I'm trying to keep it all between 30 and 40 minutes. I initially actually wanted to make them a little bit more bite-sized, and I just didn't feel like I would be able to cut it down any more than I already have without leaving out some important information. So that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I have had a great time hanging out with you. I love talking about this kind of thing. And if there's anything that I missed in this video that you feel like is really important, that you correlate with the sun, if occult anatomy is also something that you are interested in, I would love to hear your perspective on that as well. Have a great day.